כן, אנחנו נעביר את המיקרופון. Please have a seat, take your seat. We should begin now. So, good morning and welcome. We are gathering this morning to discuss Israel's contemporary environmental challenges, strategies, and solutions. Within the framework of EU-Israel relations, focusing on regulation, collaborative learning, and shared innovation. So let me begin with present the member of this panel. We are happy to have here with us Tamar Zandberg, Director of the National Institute for Climate Policy Research at Ben-Gurion University and former Minister of Environmental Protection. Adon Shalinta, Head of International Relations Division at the Israel Ministry of Environmental Protection. And Maya Yaakov, CEO and co-founder at ClimateNet, Networking to Net Zero, organization dedicated to turning Israel into leader of science-based climate innovation and carbon removal. So each one of you will have around 15 minutes to present their topic, and then Dr. Roy Kibrik, the Director of Research of Mitvim Institute and a lecturer at the Department of Political Science at Emek Israel College, will discuss your presentation and offer some insights. We will then have a Q&A session and have further discussion. So without further ado, we'll go by the order of the program. Tamar, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing from you about Israel's role in East Mediterranean shared climate action.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So I want to begin with where I was the night. Oh, sorry. Is it better? Okay. I want to share with you where I was the night that Nasrallah was assassinated. I spent it in Cyprus. I sat next to an advisor, energy expert from Lebanon. Another Lebanese representative did not show because the flights were canceled from Beirut that day. That researcher sitting next to me was lucky because she arrived the day before. And we were in a special conference of a very, very interesting initiative called the Cyprus Initiative that the former president of Cyprus started a few years ago to share climate solutions between East Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries. We spent, this is the convention or conference of heads of state from those countries that attended a special heads of state gathering in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. It was led by President Assisi and the president of Cyprus. For me, sitting there as a minister in 21 was very, very special because this was one of ours as Israelis, rare opportunities to speak with representatives from Lebanon, Iraq, countries that we don't usually, engage with. And in this conference, behind me sat the ambassador of Israel to Egypt, and she was very anxious in this gathering because she waited for something to happen. Across from me sat the Palestinian Prime Minister, and there were other representatives and heads of states from all the region, and she was very, very ready and tense for something to happen, for someone to call out Israel, for someone to step up and walk outside of the door. And actually nothing happened. And nobody said anything that did not have to do with the climate situation of the countries of the region. And that made me think that that was 21, okay, more naive than today. But that made me think that maybe, this giant enemy that is waiting for us behind the horizon is actually bigger, is actually what we need to unite and kind of forget or a little bit blur our conflicts that only grew since then. But actually this gathering, this is, as I said, the night Nasrallah was assassinated, that was September 24. So almost a year into the current war and conflict in a very, very tense night. I will not tell you, we agreed, all the participants, we agreed to keep there the comments and the reactions that people had to the to what happened that night. And but really it was people from all over the region. And I want to tell you a little bit about this initiative and our region, and then the role of Israel in it. First of all, this is the East Mediterranean, Middle East region. These are the countries that are part of this initiative. As you can see, for me as an Israeli, when I have the opportunity to sit with representatives from all these countries, it's not something that is very common or happens very often. This is a large region in terms of both population and greenhouse gas emissions. It's a significant region in terms of its contribution both to the problem, which we'll reach in a second, but also to the vulnerability. As you probably all know, this region is considered a hotspot. It means it's especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. This is this region in terms of population and GDP. As you can see, it is very diverse. I mean, it has countries that are very big and also countries that are very rich, not necessarily the same ones. And also, okay, I will get to the democracy index in a second because this is something that we did recently. But first of all, let's start with some environmental and climate data. This is the portion of these countries, the East Mediterranean, Middle East countries, versus the EU countries in terms of greenhouse gas emissions going in the last 50 years. So you can see this region is not only significant, it is growing, and it is already past the entire EU countries. These are the countries of the region in terms of greenhouse gas per capita. So you can see the countries, the Gulf countries, obviously, and then all the rest, including Israel and Palestine versus US, China, EU, and global. Okay, so again, our region is significant.
Where is Israel? Stuff here.
This is the rise of temperature in our region, the land temperature. In the Paris Agreement scenario that I guess most scientists already agree that is very unlikely. I think in the last survey that was done in climate science among climate scientists, to ask them how many of them think that we are going to stay within the Paris Agreement framework, which is not crossing 1.5 degrees. Only 6% agrees. All the rest think we're not going to meet this goal, and this is the business as usual scenario in our region. So frightening. You know, the world is looking at, even the business as usual scenario globally is looking at what, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. We are way past there. In our region, and especially in Israel, we already crossed the 1.5 degrees in 2017. This year was the first year that we have touched the 1.5 globally. Another index is the number of hot days. This is the number of hot days in Nicosia, going from the 80s till today. The maximum temperature was about 40 degrees Celsius. This is the same index in Israel. So for those of you who remember the 70s and the 80s and wondering if it really was less hot, then the answer is yes, definitely. It's not just our imagination, it's science. And this is, I want to share with you, I was the co-chair of a conference in Stanford University about a month ago. And I invited Professor Kostas Papanikolas from the Cyprus Institute, who was the special advisor to the president of Cyprus, that initiated this initiative. And the topic of the conference was climate and democracy. And we looked at the Economist Democracy Index. This is from his presentation. We looked on the relations between the Economist Democracy Index and the Yale Environmental Performance Index that was published this year. And you can see the correlation between again, these are indexes that exist. We did not invent them, but you can see the connection between the strength of democracy and the index of environmental performance in our region. Look at Israel, that is kind of pushing the which is by the way high on democracy, but low on, or relatively to its democratic index, low on the environmental performance. By the way, in the Economist Index of Democracy, Greece is the only full democracy in our region, up there. And this, by the way, this is the same index, the same connection globally, okay, to the entire country. So you can see the trend is kind of in the same direction. Now, Israel is very uniquely positioned in this region and in this scenario. Why? For those of you who attended the COPs and we were just discussing with Adam the international conferences, the main divide is between what is called the global north and the global south. Okay, the global north, the rich countries who created the problem. Okay, and the global south, the poorer countries in Africa, island countries who are very, very vulnerable, but did not contribute almost anything to the problem. Israel is uniquely positioned on both. On the one hand, it is very vulnerable. It is situated between 3 continents, 5 climate zones, very important and degrading biodiversity, rapid warming, faster than the average global rise of temperature, desertification, and of course in a position that creates a lot of geopolitical tension around issues like water scarcity, national security, etc. On the other hand, it's a country that is developed and industrialized, and unlike what many people think, including in Israel, including in the environmental movement, its portion of greenhouse gas emissions and ecological footprint is significant, not only per capita, but also absolutely. Why? First of all, Israel is not that small. If we take all the almost 200 countries of the world, Israel is number 98 in size of population. So it's the upper half, okay? More than half the countries are smaller than Israel globally. Israel is, if we put Israel in Europe, it would be 15 out of 35, okay? It's the size of a medium European country. Israel is, in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, almost twice our portion of the population. So per capita, twice than our portion in the global population, and in the upper third in terms of our ecological footprint. So the land, if we measure by land how much resource we use, we are in the upper third of all the countries in the world. We are also first in population growth in the OECD, which makes us, so we are significant and getting more significant because population growth is the first index for the extended resource consumption. And something that many people like to take a lot of pride in, the startup nation. Okay, and because we don't have a lot of time, I want to focus on, I brought a few examples, but just to focus on water, which is with the previous panel discussed energy, so we will discuss a little bit of water. This is from the Arab Barometer. It's a poll company that looks at a lot of data and indexes in Arab countries. So you can see that the biggest environmental challenge facing the country in the Arab population around the Middle East by large is water, not surprising. And Israel, like it's cut for some reason, but never mind, is a world leader on, and by far a world leader on all the water indexes, going from desalination that we all know. I don't know if you know, those of you who grew up like me in the 80s and remember the campaigns that Israel is drying out and the fakes that are cracking. I think I'm traumatized until today, but less than 40 years has passed, and today Israel desalinates over 70% of our drinking water. World leader by far in water reuse. The next country, Adam, after Israel is
Spain.
And how much, like 40% or less? You know, when we visited California and they heard that the water in Israel cost money, they were amazed. So this is another policy and legislation mechanism to make people pay close attention to using this resource. The same goes with management, monitoring, leakage control, etc. Of course, technologies. Everywhere you go, if you mention Israel, people will say the next word would be
Startup nation.
drip
Water.
irrigation. Drip irrigation is a huge thing and something that also is used to help Israeli government, Israeli NGOs with international development efforts and water diplomacy. We heard just now the what is called the green blue prosperity, the deal that Israel and Jordan signed to exchange desalinated water from the Mediterranean for solar electricity that will be grown in solar fields in Jordan, of course, under challenges right now, but this is a resource that is highly needed around the Middle East. And as I said, it is, I think I will stop here and because of our short of time and leave the other examples. But the point is that these are examples that position Israel in a region and in a place that will be that Israel is not very, I mean, diplomatically, and a lot of countries that we don't have relations with at all, and that are, especially in this region, in these times after the war, are very, very challenging. On the other hand, we have a huge enemy waiting for us ahead of us, and these times could be times for not only that the climate action is a challenge, but also when we look at the day after the war, if and when it comes, the regional topic would be in every scenario that we look in, doesn't matter, and I heard questions here before, what happens if Trump comes up, what happens if demand for electricity in Europe, what will happen there? One thing that is certain, that the Middle East will have to rehabilitate itself in a regional perspective, even in terms of Israel and Palestine. So we have an opportunity, we have the platforms and the capacities to do it. Cyprus, who is the leader of the Cyprus Initiative, is going to be the president of the European Union in 26. This initiative is a very strong initiative that they like to take into their presidency, and they're already preparing for that right now. So the opportunities are there and waiting for us, and we'll skip the Mediterranean example that I wanted to share, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe you'll have the opportunity to bring some
Yeah, yeah,
examples
sure.
in the Q&A.
Should I move there for the?
Yeah, for the presentation and Mike. So Maya, from devastation to opportunity, implementing climate solutions in the construction of urban communities. I'll just open your presentation. You can begin.
Good morning. Okay, so Build Back Better is something that is very well known around the world, in Israel less so. And the idea that we're talking about is building back better with an orientation of sustainable development, and basically using the opportunity of the horrible crisis that we're going through for something more optimistic. Just a little bit of information. Tamar gave a very interesting overview of the data of the situation that we're in right now. If we look at it in a financial perspective, the United States has, since the 1980s, they've been measuring the amount of events that are costly of $1 billion and more from climate events. And in the last 2-3 years, we've seen an amazing leapfrog, and now once in every 18 days, there's such a huge event, be it fires and floods and earthquakes and hurricanes and everything. And the money is accumulating. And basically, we need to look at this crisis not only as an environmental issue, because I'm sorry to say that many organizations are not looking at it, don't care about environment much, but they do care about money, and they do care about making money and saving money, and this is an opportunity for both, and we need to look at it also from these perspectives. The physical climate risks are amazing, and there's no subject in our daily lives that doesn't have some kind of an effect by climate. And basically all aspects of our lives are not treated well enough yet, and everything is still vulnerable. All sectors are vulnerable, and everybody needs to do significantly more than is being done right now. And the energy consumption of CO2 emissions could skyrocket to about 50 gigatons by 2050 from the 35 gigatons that we are emitting today, if the trends don't prevail. And this is an astonishing number that basically says that everybody in all sectors need to do a lot of more work at once. And in Israel, there's a saying, in Israel, basically, we're always in a delay of like 20 years after the rest of the world and everything. Everything comes here late. And we don't have the 20 years now to wait for this. But now, so slowly and gradually, people are saying, okay, we understand it, there's a problem. We'll start working on it. And we're saying, wonderful that you came on board. Now's the time to start running because it's already very, very urgent. When we talk about what we need to do, we have the mitigation, the adaptation, and carbon removal, which is not here in this slide, but carbon removal is a third very important leg of taking out the emissions that are already in the atmosphere. And I'm sure that the people here know about this, and I'm not going to elaborate this much, but we need to stop the emissions that are already damaging our atmosphere. We need to adapt and to prepare for the day after with sustainable infrastructure and capabilities and services and products that are able to serve our lives in the future despite the changing conditions. And we need to take out all the emissions that are already making our world so crazy and dying. So as I said, we need to take the opportunity that happened to us now in Israel and to turn the crisis into opportunity. Everywhere around the world is devastating, and once it ends, and I know this is a very long war and maybe some people feel it won't end soon, but every war ends, and after that, a lot of money comes in for the rebuilding, the reconstruction. And we need to take this opportunity into consideration in order to try and really build back better. Israel is a nation in trauma. Also, Palestine is a nation in trauma. The people, the infrastructure, the nation, the country, and the source to create resilience, personal resilience, sectorial resilience, national resilience is through community and safety and health and income and a promise for a secure future. And all these things can receive an answer by sustainable reconstruction. The key objectives need to be preparing for the climate crisis, as I said, and we need to preserve and to reconstruct and to rehabilitate the nature that has already been affected, and to rebuild ourselves in agricultural fields and soil and nature. We need to promote economic resilience based on agriculture, on tourism, on construction, on innovation, on entrepreneurship, so many new things that can be developed. We need to create an attractive, meaningful life in the places that are going to be rebuilt in order to attract people. When we talk about such an issue in a conference that is aimed for the EU, we need to take into consideration this is not only for war-torn areas, but also for areas that are affected by climate. And the EU is the main address for millions, if not billions, of refugees that are leaving their homes because their homes are in conditions, they're unlivable conditions. And it should be the interest of the EU to help everybody reconstruct their homes in such a way that allow them to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and not become refugees, because we must remember that nobody wants to become a refugee. Everybody wants to stay at home, to be able to live their lives and to provide for their families, and we need to make sure that we can do this in our changing world. So, we need to look at the entire redevelopment in a strategic way that looks at all these science-based innovation. Science-based is very important because today the feeling is that climate tech is a trend. People are talking about climate tech and climate tech investments today, and already now people are talking more about AI. And before that, they spoke about gaming and fintech and other things. And we need to have money being invested into science-based innovation, because the science is an important part. It's not like having, if you have a company or you're trying to develop something For the climate, it's not as if you have 5 guys sitting in a garage and developing something and then you can sell it after 5 years. This is more similar to creating medicine or health products that have a lot of effect on their surroundings, and therefore they need to have longer time in a development in a lab before they go out. There needs to be a lot of assistance to investors to understand the type of investments and the type of developments that are needed, and to make it science-based in order to make sure that we don't have any problems, we don't create any future problems that we didn't take into consideration, that we're not creating, we're not taking an ecological system out of balance because we're changing something. We're not poisoning anybody on the way that we didn't aim to do. And we need to, if we find out that our work is creating some kind of a future problem, we need to also create future solutions in order to deal with them as they go, in order for it to be really the best impactful thing. So when we look about the communities that need to be reestablished, basically it's a 360-degree type of process. So it's energy and water and absorption of carbon and restoring and preserving water and soil for agricultural lands and for nature. We need to have waste treatment and green construction infrastructure, and to promote low carbon and common economy and look at everything within a prism of low carbon economy and of circular economy. And we need to treat trauma through nature, and everything together creates much more understanding and much more dependence of people in nature, and then it creates an incentive to have actual regulations that preserve nature, because today we don't have them. I don't know how many of you know, but just this week, a few days ago, the Knesset in Israel, the Israeli parliament, actually approved the new climate law, the Israeli climate law, which is not very environmental, to say the least. It's very disappointing. We came to a situation in which the environmental organizations who have been advocating so many years to have a real climate law, a real climate act that pushes Israel forward is not, we're the ones who are advocating against the specific law because it doesn't have funding, it doesn't have real authority for the governments to do anything, it hasn't have any time frame. These things are things that we need to take into consideration when we rebuild these areas, because these are things that the government and the ministries and many people do understand without looking at it from a high perspective. But when you go and touch on things in a one-on-one treatment, so the regulation needs to be supportive, and we need to have subsidies, and we need to have every help that the government and businesses and philanthropy can give in order to make this happen. So basically the idea is to turn these 360-degree communities that have been changed in such a way into models, and to develop methodology models, treatments, and things that we can basically then make again and do them again and replicate them in Israel and around the Middle East and North Africa, and help as many people as possible stay in their homes and not become refugees, as I said. So the idea is to turn communities and regions into independent and self-reliant, with local capabilities and services that reduce dependency on national services, and create models and methodologies that will later be repeated, as I said, in devastating war climate areas. Science-based innovation is also important to avoid greenwash. In order for Israel to be able to become the startup nation in climate innovation, it's important to also be the ones who prevent greenwash. We don't do halfway. We don't decide how much impact is impactful enough for us, and then when we want to start, We need to be able to attract investments, we need to be able to attract the brightest minds from all over the world who would want to be part of this amazing process that could happen. And together we can become a beacon of hope and to turn our devastating war into something optimistic for the future through sustainability, through technology, through community engagement. Thank you.
Madam, last but not least, on the European integration, align Israel's environmental licensing with EU standards.
Okay, thank you. So I think after we heard two presentations that took us, to real visions, I believe, of cooperation in our region and building back better. I think two dreams. I mean, one might be more realistic than another right now, I say, but really visionary presentations. So I think I will bring us a bit back to earth with an example of some concrete measures that we have taken in Israel to implement European regulation or to take European regulation and integrate it into Israeli policy and regulation. As we all know, we have a gap between the environmental policy and regulation in Israel and that of the EU in most fields. And we are trying to keep up with the developments in Europe. And one of the advantages that we have is that we sometimes can like jump ahead and throughout the processes that we do in Israel, we can already integrate the revisions that are being adopted in Europe. But then that is one of the examples that I will show you today. So I'll try not to get too technical because there are a lot of details. I'm also not an expert on environmental licensing, but I am dealing with the connection to the EU. So I'll start from the end, and that is that in April, we finally approved in Israel in the Knesset the integrated environmental licensing law. And it is a process that started, I'll show you in a minute, started like 15 years ago. And finally, it has been approved, and I see it also as a personal, I would say, achievement, maybe, because I was with the ministry when we just started to promote it as part of our accession to the OECD. And I'll show you that in a minute also. So before we begin on the EU connection, what is the integrated licensing? So it is, in a nutshell, it is having one integrated permit for industrial facilities, dealing with all environmental media, water, marine, air, and other issues. And it is based, as I said, on the European directives, which began back in the 90s with the IPPC, it was called then. Today it's called the IED, Industrial Emissions Directive. And you can see it's emissions. It's not on water, it's not on air, it's on everything together. It's an integrative point of view. So one of the advantages of this regulation is also that besides minimizing emissions, it also looks at the whole picture. It looks at minimizing resource use, energy, water, materials, and so on. And it really takes an integrated view of environmental protection, which is something that until a few years ago, we didn't really implement in Israel. And this is an example of how we are now starting to rethink how to deal with environmental protection. One main and major advantage also is the implementation of best available techniques, which is also a concept that we are trying to integrate as much as we can in Israel, looking at the best available technologies, but also the best available policies or ways of dealing with environmental hazards. Now, the environmental licensing now is being revised as part of the European Green Deal, and that is what I said before, that we are now already, because we haven't had this concept of integrated licensing before, we are now already integrating the advanced policy that is being used in Europe. So here you can see a timeline of the development. As I said, it mostly began when we accessed the OECD in 2010. And we then benefited from two twinning projects with the EU. Because it's European legislation, we of course didn't have to, as we say, invent the wheel. We just learned from what has been done in Europe. We had a twinning project in 2013 with Germany and led by Germany. Then we had another twinning project in 14-16, also with Germany, Austria, and then the European state of the UK, on Northern Ireland, more precisely. But what is important to see here is that it doesn't always, it's not enough to have the European pressure and to learn from the EU. Of course, there are a lot of discussions, internal discussions in Israel, and it's not easy to have legislation. We just heard from Maya about the climate law, so this was also the case with this piece of legislation. There were a lot of discussions back and forth. You can see there was a government decision back in 2014, that's 10 years ago, a draft law 10 years ago. Then again, that draft law was not approved, so we had another round of discussions, a revised draft law, another government decision, and finally the law was approved in 2024. So what is important to see here is that the European legislation, when we started the process, was not the same as it is today, and now we are implementing an advanced piece of the directive. So just to give you an idea of how it affects Israel, I want to say I think it's not as sexy as a climate law, but I think it has a huge impact, and it's probably a kind of an environmental revolution that you don't know about because it's very technical sometimes. It affects mainly some 2,000 industrial facilities in Israel, and that is a lot for a country like Israel. It's the major facilities in Israel, and large or medium-sized factories. And it is being implemented through more or less through existing pieces of legislation, which is the Clean Air Law and the Hazardous Substances Law. So why did we need this? Why did we need to take this piece of legislation from the EU, besides the need to meet OECD requirements? We recognized that we had a big gap between Israel and EU, and we were not the only one at the Ministry of Environment to recognize this. The industry too realized that we need a change here, and you will see in a moment I'll talk about the benefits. You'll see how everybody benefits from this. So the licensing process in Israel was very fragmented. You needed licenses for discharge to water, to air, to marine environment, and so on. You needed numerous permits for different time frames from different people at the ministry. It was more or less a mess, I would say, and it was very hard for the industry to meet the requirements and to go through the process. we didn't have a real best available technique implementation in Israel. And we didn't have, and we still don't have, full public participation and engagement in the process. Versus Europe, where that was the situation and has been the situation for many years now. So here you can see the benefits. So I said alignment with the EU and OECD standards, but that's just, you know, the technical thing. It has better environmental efficiency. It's very small, but I'll just mention a few. Examination of mutual effects between different environmental media. That is, you know, sometimes a plant can minimize the emissions to air, but at the same time shift the emissions to water. And this law looks at the whole picture, and therefore it is the aim is to minimize the total emissions to air. The inspection is supposed to be better from the inspection by the regulators. Now, from the point of view of the industry, there is a reduction of the administrative burden. There is going to be one person. The aim is to have one person at the ministry that the plant is in contact with. It gets one permit. And it is going to be a permit for 10 years and not for 1 to 7 years as it is today. It depends on which kind of permit. The criteria and timetable are going to be predetermined, and so it increases the certainty for businesses. There's also going to be an administrative appeal mechanism, which means that the industry can appeal if it believes that the permit is not I would say fair from their perspective. So because we know that such a big change is not easy to implement. Now, other benefits of the reform are the administrative improvements in the ministry itself. We are going to get hopefully more manpower and budgets. That's also important from our perspective. There's going to be more public engagement and higher transparency. And last but not least, economic benefits. It is, according to the economists, this law is going to bring on huge savings for the economy. Now, this is just an example. Before the law, and today actually we're still before the law, a factory is supposed to apply for a permit for air emissions, which is valid for 7 years. A permit for having hazardous materials, which is enforced for 1 to 3 years, depends on which plant and which materials. Discharge to marine environment is up to 5 years, valid for up to 5 years, and a business license is valid between 5 to 15 years. 4 different permits for different periods. After this reform, these major installations or plants are supposed to get, I wouldn't say 1, but I'll say 2, it depends on which plant, but 2 permits. One is integrating the hazardous materials, the business licensing, and the air emissions to one integrated permit for 7 to 10 years, depending on which plant. And the marine discharge permit is still separate, but it's going to have the same time frames as the integrated permit. So it's going to be much easier for both sides. And now the next steps, I'll finish with this. We are now going to implement this law over a period of 3 to 5 years, gradually. The full implementation will start in 2027. The ministry will publish secondary legislation, and the whole process of applying for a permit and getting the permit will be digital. So we are setting up a digital licensing system. We are recruiting personnel, and there are huge administrative changes in the ministry, mainly in the district offices of the ministry. So it's a real big step for the ministry too. And of course, development of guidelines and procedures for implementation. So I end with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation on a very important topic. And Maya, can you join the panel? Please, will you take 10 minutes to reflect and then.
Right, thank you. Um, well, I thank you for the presenters and thank you for inviting me. Try to connect between those three presentations somehow and maybe to point on what all three of you presented, bringing to the fore the tension between opportunities and the crisis or challenges. The need to grasp the opportunities or not to throw them away. The need to deal with the monster there out in the future or not in the future. Now if we facing, if you wish or not. The need to learn from each other inside Israel, between Israel and the region, Israel and the world, in building back better, in regulation or in knowledge, and the importance of connectivity between states, between different realms of activities in Israel, and between regions as well, not just between states, also between regions, for example, the Mediterranean or Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, and obviously Europe and the Middle East. Question mark regarding the role of Europe in your presentations that I would like to emphasize maybe later in my questions. I'll start with Tamar, some questions and some insight maybe. I was in a seminar, I think 6 years ago at the Cyprus Institute, trying to prepare the initiating the Cyprus initiative. So I'm glad to see it rolling slowly, but and well, maybe to something regarding the monster out, you know, the call for a shared goal for humanity. I think Nietzsche said that in the absence of a shared goal, maybe the humanity is absent as a whole. But regarding your presentation, you said something interesting regarding the need maybe to think about changing the focus of the regional states regarding adaptation and mitigation, because the focus was mainly on adaptation until now, thinking that, well, we're not contributing much. But following your presentation, maybe there need to be a shift in the way we think and act. You also pointed to the connection between democracy and environmental behavior or success in dealing with environmental threats. It needs obviously to concern us as well when we see the VDEM last publication pointing that we fell from liberal democracy to electoral democracy. It goes as well to my presentation regarding science, because science goes with democracy, and we see the connections here. So a point of concern. And I will continue with Maya, and you rightly so, I think, pointed on the opportunity to learn from experiences of others. And you suggest that Europe and US, well, the whole world can learn from a good model of reconstructing the communities in the Western Negev.
And in the north.
And in the north. And I would like to ask you, or maybe to point on the idea that it doesn't go all the way, meaning that in order to reconstruct the communities, we have to analyze or take a step backward and look on the region or the surrounding of the communities. So we cannot reconstruct a closed community, not in the way we think about the future of how we should live. It won't be sustainable, right? To reconstruct Be'eri and not reconstruct Bet Lahia. So if we wish to present to the world a model of reconstruction, then we have to analyze it not by political borders maybe, but environmentally, looking on the environmental basin that we need to deal with, and human basin, obviously. And lastly, Adam, well, first, is it a successful process that we embraced? Looking on the process, not on the end goal. It took a long time to achieve it. Second, is it a successful outcome? We're not there yet, but for example, I can understand maybe the change, for example, of giving a permit just once in 10 years, not in 1 and 3 years. But then, so it's less bureaucracy. But then the bureaucracy loses some of its tools to hold the industries accountable, right? So we have some pro and cons here. And for questions that I would like you, before like other questions from the audience, I'd be happy if you could relate to where is Europe here? Well, actually, the twinning of Europe here and the regulation of Europe is a good example. One of the only example I know of that I've met. I'm sure there's more, but maybe Europe can assist us more, not just in embracing the regulation, but also in implementing it. Also in, for example, help Israel to deal with industries that are much stronger than we are able to deal with them alone. And I think about offer families, right? It's quite a business that influential in Israel. Maybe question mark, Israel needs help from outside in order to deal with the big businesses, right? To tie the hands of the government not to deal with them, for example. And going back to maybe, I don't know if there's an elephant in the room, a giraffe or whatever, there's a political conflict here. Tamar, you presented a vision, and Maya as well for reconstruction here, and there's a political conflict, ongoing political conflict. Maybe 2021, all were convinced that we can skip the political conflict, the conflict between Israel and Palestinians, and move to regional cooperation. But we know that's not the case, but not if you want it to be sustainable. So how does this affect, and what's the role of Europe in tying all the knots together? And I will finish with the idea of embracing the paradigm of connecting the environment and policy. Today, you cannot differentiate between any kind of policy, not just foreign policy, any kind of policy and the environment. And it has to be, if you want it to be sustainable, and we wish it to be sustainable, to drive your action today from a future picture or future reality you want to be in, not from past and convictions, to think about diversity, to think about mutual interdependence, to think about equality, all those principles that are very familiar in the sustainable development language that need to be embraced also to other realm of policies. Yours. Questions from the audience.
Maya.
Maya, then Einat, and then Lior.
We'll then have the opportunity to refer to Louis' points and also to answer some questions from the audience.
I have a question directed to Adam. I started a project with a few other researchers about Europeanization in Israel. And what you presented was a perfect example of Europeanization. And my question is, it divides into two. To what extent do you see from the Ministry of Environmental Protection that the OECD is actually driving Europeanization? Because part of the OECD regulations are coming from the EU. And when you do Europeanization, when you adopt EU legislation, regulation, directives, whatever, or standards, to what extent do you do copy paste, and to what extent do you insert Israeli, parts into those? Like, to what extent do you change the regulations and adopt it, and what are the reasons for the changes that you insert if you do?
Thank you. Einat, was Lior.
Yes. Standard, I'm gonna be rude and ask you two questions because I believe they are not just $1 million questions, but several $1 million questions. The first thing is, what do you think, based on your experience inside and outside the political system, is the main barrier to unlock the potential, the regional potential around climate? We see beautiful initiatives such as the Israeli, Jordanian, Emirati initiative that are beautiful, but are not implementable. And I want to ask if you think, in an overview, it's political, is it geopolitical, is it infrastructure, is it legal or institutional? And second question, we just came back from Brussels, where we met with the senior representative of the EU External Service, the Foreign Office of the EU, where we discussed the nexus of energy, climate, and security in the Middle East. And we explained, we mentioned how vulnerable this region is already, climate, security. And we said that what we see, and that's mainly, it might contradict what you just said, that we see that the EU also in the Middle East implementing mainly mitigation strategies and not adaptation. And we raised the idea that maybe I call it adaptation first. Maybe it makes sense in this region, in terms of the EU involvement, to start with adaptation to stabilize the region with different initiatives we can all think of, and then go to mitigation. I think he understood, but he said it's basically a bandage, and mitigation is the thing we need to strive for. And I'm wondering what's your perspective, especially in terms of the EU involvement in the region.
תודה. ליאור?
So I'll throw that quite similar question to the last question. If I had a skull, probably hold it in my hand, and I would ask to technologically innovate, to learn from others, to monetize, to securitize climate change, or not to be. Okay, or not to do that. That is the question, right? And I think Adam offered us a period check, right? The real story of how to get countries to do something here in the context of what's running, it's actually sanctions, right? Story here is supply chains. If Israeli producers and firms will not adhere to this kind of nothing, they will not be able to further integrate, or they will have to step out of supply chains to Europe, and that costs a lot of money. So I guess my question is more from my Tamar. What kind of mechanisms can Europe offer to implement, to push Israel and other Mediterranean countries in the context of what you've discussed, right? To act together beyond goodwill. So it's a bit, what is the barrier? It's not just a barrier, right? What kind of mechanism in concrete terms can beyond goodwill, right? I mean, joint learning and all these things are very nice, but then there's something like an additional layer that needs to be inserted here. So what can be done in this sense?
We'll take another one.
To expand on the question that we asked Maya, if you can share your thoughts on how you think Europe's role in reestablishing and rehabilitating Israel and Palestine after the conflict in regards to climate initiatives can look like.
Thank you. יאללה, שלכם.
Okay, thank you for the questions. First of all, I will tackle the opportunities versus challenges, and then adaptation versus mitigation. I think my presentation went to show that's also to Adam's preliminary remark about being very, very visionary or dreamery. These are things that actually happen, and they happen now. I mean, as I said, I spent the night when Nasrallah was assassinated. That was 2 months ago in this framework. And Cyprus is eager to take this issue into their European presidency in 26, and they take a lot of pride in the fact that they are the only country that is an EU member in this initiative and kind of the bridge between the Middle East and Europe. So it's happening now in the midst of war in the Middle East. It's true that the blue-green prosperity is tough, but as you see, things that are totally dependent on Israeli legislation take 15 years, and that MOU was signed less than 3 years ago. So I wouldn't take the current situation as being, as a hint of that nothing is going to happen, because things are happening. And by the way, coming out of this crisis, I think that regional cooperation and regional agreements, in a way, are more behind the corner than Israel rehabilitating the north of itself within its sovereign borders and within its money, just because, not because of not bad will or something, but just because, bureaucracy, government resolutions, the time things take, etc. So I wouldn't be that skeptical about the opportunities and the challenges and overcoming the challenges and taking advantage of the opportunities as a means to overcoming the challenges. Now, the question of mitigation versus adaptation, I think it's very, very interesting, because I think as the situation of climate deteriorates, it's getting more like a circular question, because the disasters that happen and they are becoming more frequent and are already hitting everywhere in the world are becoming an accelerator for mitigation, because suddenly people say, okay, we have to stop burning fuels in order to avoid the floods that we saw, or the and here we're going to suffer not less floods but more heat waves and things that are not a bursting crisis, but more like a gradually conditions of living that will eventually, and we have to understand also the crawling impacts of the crisis in our region. The thing is that my point here was to show that the Middle East and our region, and especially Israel, because it is uniquely positioned, in one leg in the east, one leg in the west, is that basically the global picture is also the Mediterranean/Middle Eastern picture. That was the point. I mean, we have a portion of the emissions, we have our portions of vulnerability, and we have to engage in the efforts like any other country, like any other region. Okay, China is over there, taking 30%, but also producing our products. Okay, the materials in this iPhone are accounted for China's national emissions. Okay, but so it's kind of conflicting, to look at the national production. But anywhere we look at it, the regional picture, both in terms of adaptation and mitigation, are part of the conversation. So we cannot, like Pirkei Avot said, לא עלינו המלאכה לגמור, ולא אנחנו בני חורין להיבטל ממנה. We won't solve the entire problem ourselves, but we absolutely don't have the liberty to walk away from it and think that it doesn't concern us and we have only to care for adaptation. No, it's both.
Okay. So I want to start with saying that I'm an optimist, and I do believe that we need to pursue a regional cooperation. And as you know, I'm dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and I was part of this Cyprus initiative. We also had a representative at the conference in September.
Yeah.
And we do believe, and we are willing to help promote it. And I hope that the political situation or the geopolitical situation will be better soon. And I can say just this week we had and this is also relating to the place of Europe. No, the place of Europe in these regional cooperation relations. We had a TAIEX seminar this week with representatives from countries of the Mediterranean region, including, of course, our neighbors. Now, because of the situation, or because of I would say, the technical reason of no flights and limited flights and so on, it was done online because when it was planned, there was a big problem of traveling to Brussels. But we are still participating, and the countries around us are participating in EU-led and organized events together with us. We don't see, even through the last year, we haven't seen any, I would say, principle or position of sitting together with Israelis in professional meetings. And that's, I think, a source of optimism. When it comes down to the technical level, to experts, we see a common interest of dealing with climate change and other environmental issues. So I think we must stay optimistic, and we should stay optimistic, of course, in this area. And now, regarding your question on what I presented, if it was a success, well, I don't believe you can say it was a huge success if it took 15 years to promote a piece of legislation. But when looking at the result at the end, we did do a big step forward with this legislation. Of course, we need now to make sure that it's implemented and that it's implemented according to the planned time frame and done properly. And I think another success of this process was to establish very close working relations with EU experts. I mentioned the twinning projects that we had, but even between and after the twinning projects ended, we are still maintaining very close working relations between our experts and EU experts on I don't know if it's a day-to-day basis, but whenever we need some update or we need to get some clarifications regarding EU directives, we just pick up a phone or we write the German expert that was the leader of the twinning project. So that's a success in our eyes, having these very good professional relations. And by the way, we are now considering a third twinning on the implementation of this legislation. So regarding the role of Europe and outside pressure, we need it. I mean, I'm not afraid to say that we need this. Unfortunately, the environment is not on the top of the agenda in Israel.
It's an understatement. Also not of the EU.
So outside pressure from the OECD or from the EU is a must in our case, I think. And that's why we see these training projects not just as a technical tool to learn from Europe. We also see it as, showing that this is something we need to do if we want to keep up with what's happening in the world. And we also see it now with the CBAM mechanism that the EU is going to implement. The CBAM is, taxing goods or services that goes into the EU according to the carbon content of that product or service. And I think that was a main trigger for at least promoting a climate law in Israel and climate and carbon taxation in Israel. Carbon taxation has been approved by the Knesset. It's going to take force now in January 1st. We will have carbon pricing or taxation in Israel. That wouldn't have happened, I think, if we wouldn't have had this sword, as you say, of a CBAM of taxation in Europe if we don't tax the products in Israel.
Is it going to align with the? Isn't going to match the European criteria for CBAM?
Not 100%. That goes back to the question if we do copy paste. No, we don't do
No, we
copy
don't.
paste.
Nothing.
We don't do copy paste. You know, we always say we have our special circumstances and so on. I think we give ourselves too much leverage on that, but it's always a question, you know, of pros and cons and doing discussions with
But specifically for that, what happens when the European when the Israeli exporters to Europe, for example, meet the CBAM, they will have to pay, even though
They will pay, but they will be
They'll be accepted.
reimbursed by the government later on
For the
out of
CBAM?
tax money that goes to
No,
them.
it's not so simple.
No?
It's quite complicated. There is
I mean, they are going to be
There's a compensation.
excused from the
no,
compensation for the CBAM?
no,
For the,
it's
for
two-
the,
it's
for
two
the,
different
for
things.
the
It's two different
pricing
things.
itself,
If
but
you
what,
if you pay tax in Israel, you're not supposed to be taxed in Europe if it's at the same level.
yeah.
I don't know if it's exactly the same level. It will be gradually implemented. So at some point, it ultimately, I believe it will meet the same level as CBAM. Because it's also an interest for Israel to get the tax money in Israel.
Yeah, that's the point.
But the compensation is for something else. They will be compensated by support for energy efficiency and projects in industry. So the burden, so they at the end they are supposed not to have to pay a high carbon tax. And if they don't need to pay a high carbon tax in Israel, they're also not supposed to pay in Europe.
That's
And-
that, the
and-
No,
initial,
that's fine.
this the initial point of the law,
That's
but
the
it's not
point.
exactly what happens.
And-
Never mind.
Yeah, we'll wait and see.
Mm.
So I just want to finish by, and I'm sorry if I missed something here, but I just wanted to finish and say regarding Gaza and the reconstruction of Israel, the north and south and Gaza and so on. I think that it's, and I'm speaking here out of a personal point of view, I think it's also important to have the EU involved in at least in the reconstruction of Gaza. It's an interest of Israel to see proper environmental reconstruction or proper integration of environmental considerations in Gaza. And I believe that if the Europeans are not involved in that, we won't see that. We cannot trust other countries in our region and so on to make sure that environmental considerations are taken into account in the reconstruction of Gaza. So I think there's a very important role of the EU here. Thank you.
So to add to everything that was already said, I think, and I mentioned it already, I think that the EU has three different hats that it wears that make it a big interest of Europe to be involved here. First of all, they need to, this is a way for them to treat the migration problem. They have a huge problem internally in Europe, and that could be specific funds that actually look at national security that would be divested to helping rebuild this area because of preventing migration. The second is the knowledge that Israel is such a good developer of other types of startups that are not necessarily climate tech, and we want to develop climate tech and solutions that will be able to be then incorporated in the European Union, and also as an international leader that wants to preserve world peace and peace in the Mediterranean. So And the Europeans have many mechanisms and programs that could be actually helpful. First of all, as I said, funding, be it Horizon, be it the European Bank, be it other types of programs that they have to invest and to encourage startups and programs and the projects that have already been mentioned for collaboration with the ministries of the environmental protection, of the energy, of finance. There are many collaborations going on today, and they need to be more focused on rebuilding. There should be collaborations with universities. Today, we know that there's somewhat of a growing problem between academia and Israel and other places in the world because of the political situation. If this could be a way to create a bonding, a stronger bond and more dependency between Israeli and European research institutes and universities, it would be a great advantage for us all. Living labs, creating some kinds of living labs in Israel, that would be basically what we're talking about, doing things here on the ground and bringing groups from Europe to Israel to learn what we're doing. The entire issue, by the way, of trauma treatment. Israel is like a huge beta site now for trauma treatment, for all the causes of trauma that we're incorporating. And as much as we manage to incorporate this with nature and nature treatment, that could be also a big issue that would be interesting, I think, also for Europe. Creating strategic partnerships for businesses. I don't know, creating collaborations between Israeli companies who are trying to sell already outside, and also education. There are many types of educational programs and research programs to teach us, basically. As I said, we're like 20 years behind the rest of the world here, the developed world that we're trying to be part of in this type of fields. And we have a lot to learn from them, from the successes and from their failures, and to go immediately to the things that are more successful and to learn and not to repeat other failures, and to take that as a benchmark and move on forward. So there's a lot of learning about risks and challenges and opportunities through that. We could learn from them on resource management, on how to fund these projects in a better way, also from the experiences that have been already developed in Europe. And I mean, they could have conferences, they could hold conferences, regional conferences, like the meeting that Tamar was at in Cyprus, and all the processes that are going on in Cyprus and other places in Europe and Brussels and elsewhere. We just need to have this focus. Like the first thing that I would do if I would be the EU commissioner to Israel would be hold a big conference here on the challenges and opportunities and the role that Europe can play in this. And it could be either in Israel or in Europe or somewhere, maybe in Cyprus, because we want to bring everybody on board. Not everybody wants or can come to Israel. And map the most urgent needs and the most urgent things, and to create some kind of a time frame, and how do we do this, and what kind of funding mechanisms, not only in Europe, but create international collaborations. We need to look at Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and other money that could be invested into developing all these solutions. They could be the collaborators and the ones who are basically helping to make this thing happen.
All right, we should end now. So I will thank you for an engaging and stimulating discussion, and to the audience for your participation, and we can focus some more on the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.